welcome everyone. Thank you for the slight venue change from going hybrid to Zoom only. There are a whole bunch of different viruses and other things going around, and not quite sure what's been going through my house, but I certainly did not want to expose anyone to it or have a potential lack of quorum by not being available for the meeting. So this made it so that we were able to do it by holding it initially as a hybrid meeting. It was just a minor change of location, and that was deemed to be acceptable. So I appreciate everyone's flexibility on that. And with that, we have a quorum. So we'll call the meeting to order at 7:30. And hopefully Eric will be able to join us as well. Sometimes he is a little bit more challenged on getting onto Zoom than others. So we have a rather interesting agenda for this evening. The first thing we will do is public engagement. If anyone wants to talk on things up front, you're welcome to. Otherwise, the way that, for those of you that are newer to our meetings, we tend to run our meetings relatively informally, so that if there's something that you'd like to speak on in the flow of the meeting itself, just feel free to grab the chair's attention. I will acknowledge you, and bodies, we do have specified time at the beginning of the meeting for public engagement in case anyone wants to say something up front. It gives you the ability to have the initial floor. Seeing none, we'll go on to reviewing the minutes. We actually only have one set of minutes available for current review. There are 4 meetings that we have minutes for. The meeting that we will be reviewing very quickly, and this should be a quick review, is the oldest minutes. Thank you, Anne, for putting them together and having to endure watching an old meeting multiple times. Meeting. So this is from June 27th, 2024. Just to make sure that people know what I'm referring to, I will go ahead and share those minutes. There we go.
I think they were also sent to everyone, Dan.
They should have been, although for people who are online, it makes it so that people are able to see them. So these minutes are from June 27th, 2024. This was a hybrid meeting held at Public Safety Building where we went through the recodification in depth, had quite a bit of participation from the public, which is much appreciated. And the minutes go through a lot of the various details with that. So I'm just paging through so that people can see a bit of what's in here. You may remember there was a whole discussion about microblading. And we also had discussions about various types of components for performance standards as well. So with that, do we have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Anne makes the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Joe, was that you who seconded?
Kevin, I think.
Kevin.
Okay, Kevin. Sorry, that didn't pop up on screen. Okay, so now I said here. So Kevin seconds. So with that, any discussion on the minutes before you? They have start time, end time, roll call votes, and listing of all people who were present. Seeing none, motion is to approve the minutes as presented for June 27th, 2024. We'll do a roll call vote in the order in which you appear on my screen for the members. Joe?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
And I vote affirmative, so these are unanimously approved. Thank you, everyone. I will put a footer on them. They will have the they'll have the approval date. Send those on to the town clerk as well as the chief administrative officer, as she's now known, for the town council's office. So those are available for any sort of record searches, and there's a long-term record of the meeting itself. So the other item, I'm just going to insert it here into the agenda itself, is we were requested to put in an annual report statement for the 2025 annual report based upon our 2024 activities. And so with that, I just very quickly let me make sure I've got the right one here. Is an annual report submission. We received the note on that today to get that submission in sometime in the next 2 weeks. So any objections to seeing none, if we can have a motion to submit the annual information for the annual report, while it's not required, it is requested just to make the annual report as complete as possible.
So moved.
Anne makes the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kevin. Any discussion? Seeing none, take a roll call vote in the order once you appear on the screen. Joe,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative. Excellent, thank you. I will go ahead and send that as well. So with that, we now have the agenda. So that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is feedback on the zoning recodification. And I'm just going to turn on captions here just in case anyone needs them. So the zoning recodification, we had 3 meetings in December and January with various boards. We had the opportunity to meet with the Board of Appeals, the Planning Board, and the Town Council. And we also had members of the public give feedback as well. And so wanted to open it up to the members as well as others who are present on the feedback that we received, what messages you heard, and any actions as a result of that that you think we should take in particular. Joe, Kevin, Anne, any of you want to start?
Well, Dan, I'll start. I was wondering if we're still trying to get this on the agenda for the May, um, you know, are we going to try to hold off on? Are we going to try to push this through? I mean, my suggestion would be try to hold off until the fall meeting. But does anyone have any thoughts on that? I feel like we still have a lot of paperwork to go through to get this onto the May hearing.
Joe, you read my mind. That was my comment. I don't think we should push for the May meeting. I think it's far too soon with what we have to complete, and then to present it at town meeting. I just think zoning issues cause a lot of questions and consternation sometimes, and I think we'll get pushback. Not deserved necessarily, but I think we'll get pushback, and some of these things may not fly. I don't know if we're harmed by waiting until the fall meeting. And I know that some of the other boards we work with closely probably would support that as well, based on our last joint meeting.
Yeah, that was our thoughts with the ZBA when we had our last meeting a couple weeks ago. And also, I think that we should probably see about the MBTA and the ADU, trying to get that passed before we even think about getting, the recodification done. That should be already obviously added in. And there's also a whole other thing on signs that we got to talk about that we haven't even cracked the seal on that one yet.
Kevin, your thoughts?
That was my main takeaway, that there's significant agreement among those boards that we hold off and not try to get it on for the Springtown meeting. Largely to wait for the ADU bylaw change to go through, and so that we can figure out where things really stand with the sign overlay district.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. That is a substantial portion of the feedback that we received. I would add to that we also received what I would consider to be significant pushback on including the performance standards. I think that there's a agreement in concept on having performance standards, but there is not agreement as to where those should be stated and how consistent they need to be across the boards. So by having them in a zoning bylaw, it forces a consistency and an associated difficulty of changing them. And I heard as well. So the messages that have been stated, I also consistently heard, which is we may wish to consider pushing this off to the November town meeting, due largely to the unknowns that are being presented by the MBTA communities bylaw that I don't think we've heard back from the Attorney General on, that was approved in November, and then the ADU changes, knowing that that's coming through for this upcoming town meeting. And the biggest issue that I look at is we want to have a successful presentation at town meeting, and we want that with a minimum amount of other zoning issues. There will always be something zoning related these days at a town meeting. But I heard the message that if it's combined with ADUs or any other zoning issues or any other major controversial issues, it may get confused with them, and that would cause pushback. So those were the messages that I took out of that. So that was the feedback that I heard loud and clear. Which brings us to others. If there was others, I know Mr. McCrae, you were also at those meetings. If you had heard other items that of significance that you want to contribute, you're welcome to that, and then we'll get into a discussion about how we want to address town meeting.
I think I agree with everything that's been said from a citizen's perspective, and also your comment on the performance standards that seem to be consistent with both the planning board, the senior planner in Wakefield, and also the zoning board. And then also, and I think Mark took note of this, that the zoning board wanted to go back to their standards on special permit and not what was suggested. And I think Mark took note of that they seem pretty strong on that, that their standards for special permits on things that they look at. But those are the highlights that I had also, Mr. Chair.
Attorney Bobrowski, can you hear me?
I think you froze for a minute, Dan.
Okay, sorry about that. Attorney Bobrowski, if you can hear me, do you have any additional feedback as you bring a different perspective in what you hear?
Well, I am but your humble servant, Mr. Chairman.
We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Okay, hang on. Let me see if I can get, I just had my tech guy look at the volume here. And I thought we were gonna be okay. Can you hear me now?
It's still a bit soft. It sounds like you may be picking up from a remote microphone.
I have to go into my settings and up the microphone, so I'll just shout for now.
Okay.
as I said, I'm your humble servant, and I'm here to, or wishes my command. So if the consensus of the group is that we should go in the fall, we can make that work. Just a couple of things in passing. One, I sent you, Dan, an email just a minute ago forwarding Margaret Hurley's offer to look at any town's proposed ADU bylaw. And I'm sure there'll be a line taking advantage of that. So you might send that along to the powers that be on that topic. And I think that'll be great for town meeting in the spring, because if she gives you the thumbs up, you don't have any worries when you send it back to Boston. Otherwise, the things I had largely to do here after the meeting, ZBA and town council, not that complicated. Take the performance standards out. There's a wetlands bylaw I have yet to look at, but I suspect it's going to be the basis for a general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw. So that's out of our contract territory. And I have memos from Eric and from the ZBA that they provided to me the night of our meeting that represented some small to make to the existing text, some not so small, some quite small. That basically constitutes my remaining agenda until you pile more on. If the sign stuff is going to be delegated to me, that's a major bit of work, but I'm hoping that somebody will take on that onerous task and just send me something to renumber.
My understanding is that that is currently in process with the planning board to come up with a or way of Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you froze for a
Okay.
minute there, Dan.
Sorry
30
about that.
seconds.
So
You
the
keep
internet connection,
freezing, Dan. You might want
It-
to, I wonder if you shut your camera off. Sometimes that helps. Lack of.
I can certainly try it,
Mm.
having some internet issues with my provider at the moment. So it sometimes this stuff happens. So the message that I did hear as it relates to the different pieces here is significant. And I think that for signage in particular, the planning board is looking at it, and along with the planner, the senior planner for the town. And I think that is going to be very significant for coming up with a simpler yet effective way of getting signage, and still having realistically two different goals for signage throughout the town. One for the downtown area that is a bit more specific, and then one that's a bit in terms of the performance components for the rest of the town, as it relates to commercial signs in particular. And so that's something that is currently being worked on separately, and I'm hoping that they will have that. I think that if they incorporate that into a simple piece, and if they have that done prior to whenever we do a submission, it can then get numbered correctly with the submission without it having to be a something that gets changed on the fly, and realistically still gets to be a separate part of the recodification. I don't think that we necessarily will want to own that recodification if it's being spearheaded by the planning board. That's part of the takeaway that I take from all of that.
So Dan, would it be a separate bylaw, not under what we're doing now?
It would still be part of the zoning bylaw, but it would be a separate warrant article.
Okay, got it.
That way it's a segmented discussion. And as a part of that discussion, I would encourage it. I would encourage us to leave all of the current sign by law language in there, and then it gets effectively replaced by the next article. So
Yep.
if recodification happens first, then the next thing that happens second is signed by law. It replaces that language. That way we can segregate out the discussion and simplify things for the town meeting attendees so that they don't have the confusion of the various issues.
And I'm happy to work with the authors of the new sign bylaw to get the numbering right. Of course, they'll have to prepare two versions because we don't know whether or not the recodified bylaw will pass. And
Correct.
so they'll have to use the old numbers, and then they'll also have to submit one with the new numbers.
Or they submit the new numbers and then have the old numbers as a floor amendment.
They could do that, yeah.
I'm just thinking that way that if there's less, if we go under the assumption that ours is going to pass, it's becomes a safer way other than a floor amendment that just adds more confusion. So, Attorney McGrail.
Yeah, I just had a procedural question from Mark that is interesting. So, Mark, if we pass the recodification and then the next article on the warrant is to, in essence, amend it by inserting the new sign bylaw,
Sure.
is there a problem where the recodification has not been yet approved by the AG yet? Can we actually modify it before that happens?
Yeah, I've done that many times, and I don't see that the AG will have a problem with that.
Got it.
I mean, the effective date per section 5 of the statute is the day of the vote, so,
It reverts back.
yeah, it reverts back after the AG approval.
Okay.
Good question. So with that, I'm hearing that there's definitely a request from committee members and what we've heard from the other committees to push back the recodification, the bulk of the recodification from May to November, which may mean that, Mark, you won't have to be rushing to get things done as quickly.
With one arm.
It stretches things out a little bit more for everyone, and I hope that everyone's ready to continue their service and continue working on this. But with all that said, I do think that it does give us the opportunity to get more things included. The piece that is throwing confusion here, as I see it, is the state mandated bylaw changes. So MBTA that got in the way, we have ADU that's getting in the way, and these are going to cause substantial discussion in the meeting. When it comes to the recodification, my view on recodification is that it should not be a substantial discussion on the merits of the content. It should be substantial discussion perhaps on the reason behind it and the process and things like that. But there shouldn't necessarily be a substantial discussion on the most of the content because it's really recodifying what's there. There are some changes in there, those will be highlighted. And if people want to discuss those, I think that that would certainly be warranted and appropriate. But I don't want those to be distractions that would get in the way of getting the 2/3 vote necessary to recodify the overall process. And I do share some of the concerns that if it feels rushed, especially in light of what happened last year in Wakefield with the MBTA MBTA communities bylaw, it will not go over. So Attorney Bobrowski, there was a lot of really bad ill will at the May town meeting to the November town meeting about the MBTA, the way the MBTA communities bylaw was handled. It did pass in November. They had exposure. They also felt about overreach. And I think it's best that we avoid those topics independently. So that way, those are just a part of this. They're a part of the current bylaws. And there isn't really need to discuss those elements in and of themselves. Hopefully there won't be things between now and then that the state throws that really throw this off track again.
Oh, did you all see the front page of the Globe on Sunday? The state is now advocating that residential lots in the Commonwealth be protected for, all lots be protected for multifamily development.
What is it, Mark? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, on the front page of the Globe yesterday, there was an
Yeah.
article from the governor's Affordable Housing Production Commission. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And it's on the left front page. Essentially what the commission is recommending is that eventually, God knows, I don't know what that means, but eventually the state step in and make all residentially zoned pieces of property for multifamily development.
So
was
that
mind-blowing.
would
It
that
was
would that be pull,
mind-blowing,
would
I'll
that
tell you
be some basically taking one?
I'll send Dan the article. He can circulate it.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like what Cambridge recently changed their zoning to eliminate single family residence as a zone as a zoning component,
Yeah.
and it sounds like this would take that to be a statewide piece, which in a lot of ways removes the local control over land use.
That was mentioned in the article.
So it'll be interesting to see if that what type of pull that gets one way or the other. There's lots of different solutions being proposed. So any objections or reasons not to push back beyond Attorney Bobrowski's desire to get this part of the project done, which is understandable and appreciated. Get that done in May would be nice, but any objections to pushing it back to the November town meeting? I'm not seeing any, so I think that it's safe to say that we're not going to be submitting an article in the next 2 weeks to recodify the bylaws in bulk. So, well, welcome, Eric. So hopefully you're okay with that as a directive from the committee, Attorney Bobrowski.
Yes, as I said, you and
Okay.
I can work out a schedule by keeping in touch. We can spend the time profitably by cleaning up some of the sections that we know will be going forward. And as you keep me posted, we'll get ready for November.
Sounds appropriate. So along with that, one of the other components is that we will need an updated draft of the bylaws when you have them available so that we can then post them and circulate them. I know that feedback received from member Eric Reed, who's since joined us, and I believe Attorney McGrail also has some feedback that he'll be sending you as well. So that you upon your knowledge and expertise what seems to be sensible, and if there's any questions or anything, we'll bring those to the full committee. But
Very
I
good.
figure it makes sense to let you really try to understand different pieces. If you need to contact those persons, you're welcome to do so.
And I've just sent you the article in yesterday's Globe.
Excellent. I will forward that to the committee.
Buckle up.
Excellent.
Dan, can you send me that too? I'm really interested in that. Thank
Sure.
you.
Any other items, any other questions as it relates to the May 5th town meeting? And my apologies for typing the wrong date on the agenda. I had May 6th listed. It's actually Mayo, May 5th. That brings us over to item 6, accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So the planning board, just to continue that discussion, the planning board did submit a draft bylaw proposal that has been sent on to Attorney Bobrowski. And that is going before my understanding is that that is going before the planning board for a public hearing. It's been referred to them or will be referred to them tonight. And that is going to be proposed at the May 5th town meeting. Kevin, do you know if that's consistent with your understanding as well?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Is there any feedback that would be needed from this committee without there being a recodification at this point that you think would be helpful?
Maybe only if any members have specific input on verbiage. This one is a little bit, well, it's quite a bit different than the MBTA communities where our hands are tied a lot more on this one than they were on that one. So there's not as much flexibility with this that the state's giving us.
Okay. So with that, I will put a copy of those drafts for the committee that they're available by the planning board from, I believe, on the planning board's website. I'll also put a copy of them in Dropbox for members if you wish to wish to look at them that way as well. So otherwise, I don't think that this committee should take a formal opinion on it at town meeting, but it is zoning bylaw. So if we wanted to, we could. But my thinking is that we avoid taking a formal opinion on something that's proposed unless there's a strong opinion that we should. Seeing none, moving forward, we're going at record speed tonight. Wetlands bylaw. So as I sent to all of the members, we did receive a request just for advice and guidance for wetlands bylaw proposal by the Conservation Commission. And I believe you just brief us as to what we should potentially be looking for there.
Sorry, Dan, you cut out. Who is
So-
your question directed to?
To anyone on the Concom that would like to speak.
Sure. My name is Eleanor Axelrod. We met with Attorney Mullen and shared our draft wetlands bylaw, and he provided edits. But we've come to you today to figure out how it would be incorporated into both the new codification and also the existing codification. One of the distinctions that you brought up, Attorney Bobrowski, was that this would be a general bylaw versus a zoning bylaw. And so I was curious how that would fit in. I also noticed in the existing draft, there are themes that transect Conservation Commission jurisdictional areas. You know, when you talk about buffer areas and setbacks from ponds and wetlands. So I'm curious how a zoning bylaw and then this wetlands non-zoning bylaw would fit together.
May I, Dan?
Absolutely.
So the town of Wakefield has a booklet which contains all of the general bylaws that currently exist in the town. And I'm looking at the table of contents. It includes things on the Affordable Housing Trust, the organization of the town council, the treasurer's office responsibilities, alarms, alcoholic beverages, brownfields, just highlighting things, hunting and trapping, storm drain system. Zoning is one of the stops on the way. That's chapter 190. Everything I've mentioned has a number prior to 190. Scenic roadways is 191. So in the vast majority of towns that have adopted a wetlands bylaw, it's a general bylaw. In order for the Conservation Commission to play an important role, which it does not play under zoning, for example, it is not an eligible special permit granting authority, only can be filled by the planning board, the ZBA, and in your town, the town council. There is a general bylaw that more or less was put in place beginning about 47 years ago in a case called Lovequist versus Dennis to close the state regulatory scheme and also provide a bit more protection beyond the loopholes. So the general bylaw does things like regulate vernal pools, which are not mentioned in the state regulation. It also regulates the buffer zone. So in the state buffer zone, you can go right up to the 1 foot line, whereas many towns have a 25-foot no touch and a 50-foot no build. And those are in the general bylaw. The other example would be the limited project exception, which is a way to cross wetlands where there's no other way to get to the upland piece of property. Those are the highlights usually of a general bylaw. And a meeting needs to pass it only with a 50% plus 1 vote, unlike a zoning bylaw, which is a 2/3 vote. And it's not generally in the book, the zoning book. It's in your, what are they called here? Division 1 through the Board of Health regulations are here. Your numbered bylaws go all the way up to Chapter 550, ZBA rules. You've got waterfowl regulations, wells, private, now I'm going backwards. That's the home for what you want to do, and it's an effective way to do it.
May I ask a follow-up? If you have, for example, zoning bylaws that may contradict what a wetlands bylaw would be, how would we handle that? For example, I'm just looking at your section 8.6.14. I don't know if anybody wants to share the screen, but it's state-specific design standards. And it talks, paragraph 3 talks about buffer areas. And in it, it talks about, basically a 20-foot setback. But if the proposed wetlands bylaw is a 25-foot setback, then they're not consistent.
And the usual interpretation would be that the stricter of the rules, even though there's contradiction, the stricter always controls. But a proper thing to do after the passage of the wetlands bylaw would be to comb through the zoning bylaw for things like that and update the zoning bylaw to match the general bylaw.
Okay, and I apologize for all my questions. I hope this is okay. If we wanted to make an update to the zoning bylaw, then would that require, I guess, to repeal something or update it to make it consistent, that also requires a 2/3 majority vote?
Yes, any change to the zoning bylaw requires a 2/3 vote. But like I said, it's no harm, no foul. For example, what if in section 3 buffer areas in the provision you just cited, it says a buffer area not less than 20 feet shall be provided, and your new general bylaw says 25 feet, it's the 25 feet that will control.
Okay. Okay. And then I think our other thought initially was we wanted to repeal a stream setback bylaw and replace it with a wetlands bylaw, but that sounds like that's not possible because one is a zoning and the other is a general bylaw.
Doing another town right now, I think it's Norton, and they've had a lot of trouble passing a general bylaw, but they have something ancient in their zoning in which they narratively describe every wetland area through the Hatch Act, which was 1960. First of all, those areas have probably changed so that they're more wet or less wet, but they're not the same as they were 40 years ago. And they just don't seem to have a will as a town meeting, although they're going to try again this year to pass the general bylaw. So it sounds to me like some of the things in the Wakefield bylaw are remnants from your past, where you may have had the same problem. But 100 towns now have a general bylaw. There's a the first town was Dennis on Cape Cod, and the lawyer, Greg McGregor, has made a name for himself as the leading Conservation Commission lawyer in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. And there's never a need to apologize for asking really good questions at a public meeting. This is how you learn and how the rest of us learn as well. So seriously, we appreciate the questions. Anyone else have other questions, feedback? So the draft that was circulated to the members.
Dan, Brian has
Yep.
his
And
Brian has his hand up.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to call him in a moment. So the draft that was sent included the edits and so forth from Attorney Mullen. So that's why you may have seen different edits in that particular draft. So Attorney McGrail.
Yeah, I would just respectfully make a respectful suggestion to the Conservation Commission that if you are proposing a general bylaw, I don't think many people in town know about that. The planning board has taken a position that I think has been very well received, that, for example, on the ADUs that they're dealing with now, they've had public forums where they've advertised and have really put it out there that they're considering a change to the bylaw, and they've had some good participation with that. And I would respectfully recommend that you maybe look into doing that before you bring an article to town meeting, because people like a chance to review it, have public comment on it, make suggested changes to it or recommendations. And then it makes it a much easier path during the town meeting process versus debate at town meeting floor when nobody really kind of knows about it. Now, I know you've had it on your agenda and have had discussions amongst your commission about it, but it's, I don't think it's been posted on the town website, the draft. So nobody kind of knows that what it's all about. So that's just a kind of a helpful thought that, you might want to forego it. It's up to you in the spring until you have some time to vet it publicly and get input and feedback on it, to maybe put it in a form that's going to be, more easy to pass. That's all.
I think
If I'd
that's a
like to
great
just add to that,
suggestion.
Mr. Chairman, I really agree with Attorney McGrail on this, because a general bylaw, unlike a zoning bylaw, does not require a public hearing before town meeting. That's unique to zoning bylaws. The planning board must hold a public hearing by statute. So whatever you do will be really an opportunity for the people in town to the meeting, a workshop meeting, a caucus, whatever you want to call it, and see the final draft and to offer suggestions.
Mhm.
Because the Conservation Commission tried this a while ago, Eleanor, years ago, and it didn't succeed. And I think part of the problem was nobody really kind of knew what it was all about. And as Mark is saying, it just shows up on town meeting floor, and then it turns into chaos. And the other thing is the planning board, Mark, in Wakefield is actually, to their credit, gone beyond that. They don't, what they're doing, what they've done recently is with zoning articles before they publish, like with the ADU, they've had public forums on it before they put it in the final form. And I think they're gonna have success with the ADU on that, because they've taken a lot of public feedback, and kudos to them for doing it.
The other piece that I'm taking from this discussion is, in addition to the public outreach, which is what I'm hearing both attorneys strongly recommending, and I would concur with that, is if there's a way in the zoning portion to put in effectively an editorial comment. So it's not a bylaw, but an editorial comment that should remind people to check the Conservation Commission regulations and bylaws. I'm not sure if that's something that can be done, but it might be advisable to get to some of the potential confusions, as well as raise awareness that there can be these conflicts that otherwise occur. Attorney Bobrowski, is that something that could be done? Is kind of an editorial comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Some towns, right up front in the bylaw, page 1, say, this is the zoning bylaw, but it's not the only bylaw. And here are some things everybody should consider when they want to develop a project of any sort. And it lists everything: scenic road bylaw, conservation commission regulations, whatever else there might be, Board of Health regulations, subdivision regulations. So there's probably another 3 or 4 that could go on that list. And if it's all referring the reader to the otherwise applicable general bylaw, they'll know where to find it. So that's a page 1. I see that not that often, maybe 1 out of every 7 or 8.
From what you're describing, I think that my personal opinion is that would be very helpful for Wakefield, where we have such a wide variety of organizations that are promulgating regulations and involved in property-based projects. So thoughts by the other people on the meeting itself? If that's something that
I think it's certainly helpful. We're not creating new bylaws. We're just simply pointing to ones that we may find relevant. It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing list, but sure, I think that certainly could be helpful for folks.
Something as we get going again.
Joe, Kevin, Eric, others? Attorney McGrail?
I was just going to point out that Eleanor made touched on a good point. If eventually the Conservation Commission is going to do something, there's a specific provision in our bylaw that the Conservation Commission has struggled with in conjunction with the zoning board. And it's currently 4.2.12 on Mark's latest version, and it's setback from open streams. And it says, in no case shall any building or structure be permitted within 50 feet of the embankment of any open stream as defined by the Conservation Commission using the applicable DE. It said, well, this says Massachusetts Department of Environmental Quality Engineering Standards. And Jim Luciani, who's on the commission, has made an argument that this bylaw is really not, you can't even interpret it because there's no such thing as an embankment on an open stream. And this is where I think if the commission has a bylaw, they would deal with this stuff. It's really an appropriate thing for them to deal with and not the zoning board. The zoning board has always struggled with this provision in conjunction with the Conservation Commission. So I think as you move forward in this process, this might be something you want to remove from our zoning bylaw. And then eventually when the Conservation Commission moves forward with a bylaw, theirs would deal with it. This is more of an appropriate issue for the Conservation Commission to deal with.
I agree completely.
And may I ask a follow-up question, Brian? So with your suggestion of the public forum, it does not have to go to planning board, but were you suggesting that we should do it through planning board?
No, I would
Okay.
suggest you do it on your own.
Okay.
Even publicize that the Conservation Commission is considering doing a local wetlands bylaw, and that a draft of it, whatever draft you think is appropriate, can be found here. And you would have that as part of your meeting, a public forum where you would talk about it and take public comment on it.
Okay.
And then, it can either be tweaked or changed, or, it finally gets into a form that then you would present to town meeting. And then, people will have had a chance to see it, comment on it, have input on it. Similar to what's happening with this bylaw recodification process. And that's why I think in November, this is going to fly through with, with a passing grade, because the bylaw committee's taken its time to work through it, I think. But just to show up at a town meeting with a bylaw, I think it's a recipe for failure, to be honest with you. Just my personal thoughts.
I agree.
Great feedback and input. And this is where the collaboration across boards, I think, can become really helpful. This is just a really good example. Other thoughts on this topic or others related to it?
Brian, can I ask you a question quickly? I forget, it's banks, but it was Outer Banks. What was the term used?
An embankment in.
Embankment. Thank you.
Yeah. And Jim Luciani, who he's made the argument that an embankment doesn't, the definition of embankment, he really took a look at it and kind of laid it out why embankment is not, a stream doesn't have an embankment. I think his reasoning on that is an embankment is a man-made thing.
Mhm.
You know, that's how you define embankment. And he
Got
went
it.
to it, so it really doesn't make sense because a stream doesn't have it, because it's a natural bank of a stream.
Thanks, Brian.
He did, it's available. Jim did a real dissertation on this. He laid it out in writing, so it's, he spent some time. Eleanor, if you talk to him, he'll have it.
We drafted a letter. Yeah.
I think I'm right about that, right? That
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
I think Jim might have, or a resident might have, I think a resident proposed a zoning bylaw amendment to eliminate that provision. And the Conservation Commission supported it. And that's where Jim did his dissertation. And then at that meeting, I think it was discussed that, well, maybe we need to get rid of it, but it should be looked at perhaps, during a recodification like we're doing now or in the future. So I think it might be a good time to look at that now, perhaps as we go forward.
So with that, Attorney Bobrowski, any thoughts on is this something that would impact the recodification with any of those pieces, or is that something that you take a look at provided this bylaw passes?
The latter. So if the bylaw passes, part of the recodification would be to strip out those sections that are now going to be handled under the general bylaw, which they should have been all along.
Okay. Excellent. So it sounds like we're going to get things into a better state than they currently are, which is, I think, everyone's goal from the start and through the finish of this entire process. Okay, with that, any other topics, any other feedback from any of the other guests that we have on this topic? So moves us to item 8, proposed bylaws on town meeting updates. Last December, there was a discussion about some possible changes to town meeting operations. And after reviewing that meeting in depth and talking with others, that's something that I would like to bring up again at another meeting, where we'll talk about the ability for town meeting to decide have its own ability to decide what's relevant and what's not. And the idea being that if something is meeting as determined by the meeting itself, it has the ability to avoid a full presentation on it. And that will require us to have a general bylaw that addresses that issue. Because the ways that were proposed to prevent presentations and other items were problematic in and of themselves. They required that an issue be fully discussed before you discuss whether it's even relevant. And an example of this was that where we saw it several times last year was on Middle East politics issues, but the same thing could also be said of national politics issues, which would be outside of the realm of what a town meeting should likely discuss. But whether we should discuss it or not should be an issue for town meeting itself. Town meeting should be allowed to regulate its own operations. You know, that's really where I look at that, and I'm going to try to refine some of the language a little bit, but I just to be full in full transparency, I do plan on bringing that back to this issue will come up again, along with
Dan,
along with how town meeting operates. Go ahead.
while the committee takes on this topic, it's beyond my scope, so if there's
Correct.
nothing else that folks have for me, I'm gonna disappear into the night.
So the one thing that was all I wanted to mention on that, because so that you're aware that yeah, there are some other topics. The last thing is actually definitely within your scope, and that's in our next meetings. So to see what availability is for you and others. So the next meetings, according to our normal schedule, would be March 3rd and March 17th. And wanted to find out availability by members for those dates, and you, Attorney Bobrowski, as well. Those are the first and third Monday. March 17th, obviously, to do other items.
I know your town meeting is on May 5th, and we're not going to public hearing. I'd rather work, you and I talked earlier today on the phone, Mr. Chairman, about looking at what we have together at just the two of our heads put together, looking at what we have, agreeing on minor changes to it, bring it back to the committee, and then by then town meeting should have been held, and we'll have a new framework for what we need to do next. So I would prefer to do that. I've got 2 other towns I'm taking to town meeting, and I've got to go to the Concord town meeting for a client here as well. I'd rather work, you know, either on Zoom or you and I can sit down in a public meeting place in town hall, get some quiet work done, and then bring it to the committee right around the time town meeting is done.
So with that, I'm taking it that we're looking at probably bringing you back for a full meeting in the beginning of June, the end of May, beginning of June.
Somewhere right at if the town meeting is on the 5th, any time in May is fine.
Okay. So in the meantime, for people who have feedback on the current drafts, I know that again, member Eric Reed had some feedback that was submitted. I know Attorney Bobrowski has Attorney McGrail has feedback that he wants to submit as well. So that can be submitted. And
I have
then
the ZBA
when you
memo too.
and the other from the meetings we had in December, then we can come up and get another draft, a draft 8, unless there's an internal draft 8, and it'll be draft 9, whatever the next number is of that draft, to then be discussed after the town meeting. That's what I'm hearing.
Yep, and I look forward to sitting with you one day in the next 2 weeks to see what kind of damage we can do. And then
Okay.
I'll start working on the other people's comments. I would ask the committee to take a look at Eric's thoughtful comments and ask the members whether or not they want me to deal with that. I think I've said many times that I appreciate the individual members' contributions, but I need to be told that it now reflects the thinking of the whole committee. Otherwise, I would go off on a diversion and end up having to strip it out if there were disagreements later. So everybody should take a look at that. And
So I will send the comments from Eric to the committee, and members can get back to you with their thoughts on that, because we don't want to.
Just remember the open meeting law. Don't reply to each other.
Right. That's why they'll get, if people have thoughts on it, they can contact you directly.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I know you like to remind people, Mr. Chairman, of the important events in our lives that are going to be celebrated soon. I'll remind everybody that today is the 47th anniversary of 78.
Thank you. Very, very, very important.
All right.
So with that, meeting dates for March. It'll probably be general bylaw related. Desire for March 3rd, we can do that and then have a second meeting as appropriate, but we will not have any general bylaws for the May town meeting. But having some meetings to discuss some of these other topics may not be a bad thing. So options for March and availability.
Dan, I'm not suggesting that I have plans for March 17th, but I don't want to foreclose myself if something nice comes up.
That sounds like a very green oriented comment.
Yes, as my middle name McGonagall should be on my name, actually.
I thought that was Italian.
Yeah, Portuguese, actually, my husband. So I think March 17th, who knows? Might be fun to go grab a drink somewhere with some friends. So I'd rather we don't meet then, but we certainly have other days to meet.
So with that, March 3rd, any objections? Meeting in a couple of weeks.
Third is
Well,
fine with me, Dan.
March 3rd,
That-
rather. It should be
that's next
which would
week,
be
right?
next week and that would be to discuss general bylaws. At this point, it would be realistically, there are a couple of open general bylaw items. So we have the town meeting options, and I know that we also have an open item that that again, remember Eric Reed had brought forward to have some minor changes made or suggested for the annual report. And then there were some other things that were going to be brought forward by Attorney Mullen, but he didn't get the articles to us in time. So we can use that as a reason to nudge for those as well. So people open to having another meeting next week?
Fine with me.
Yep.
Yep, that works.
Okay, in which case March 3rd it is. March 17th is unlikely. We will probably be going ahead and looking for leprechauns and other things on that day. If anyone finds a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, please be sure to protect it very, very carefully. So with that, several upcoming observances and holidays, you'll see those on the agenda. So there's Mahashivarati, Ramadan, and St. David's Day all coming before the next meeting itself. With that, we have one final item, which is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll move.
Oh, that one was quick. So Ann gets the motion. Joe, was that you seconding that to try
second
and
that.
trying to get rid of the meeting as fast as possible? Be one of our faster meetings. So we have a motion made by Ann, seconded by Joe to adjourn. Any discussion? Okay, with that, we will the order has moved a little bit for this particular vote. Take a roll call vote by the order in which you are on screen. First, Ann.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes. Yes, you get that. How did he
You might be
freeze?
frozen. Kevin York,
Yes.
Eric Reed. Eric, do you move that we adjourn? Thumbs up.
He must be on mute also.
I think he's on mute too.
Okay.
Danny, you're back yet?
I'm back. And okay, Eric. I'm not seeing Eric moving, but
No.
So we'll take that as an abstention, but I'm in favor as well. So with that, meeting will be adjourned at 8:38. Thank you, everyone. Apologize for having to change the venue, and hopefully things will get a little bit cleaner for other meetings going forward. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks a bunch.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Take care.